Die größte Wirtschaftskrise der Nachkriegszeit, eine Finanzkrise, eine Bankenkrise, eine Schuldenkrise. Wie kann sie gelöst werden? Guter Rat ist nicht teuer, davon gibt es viel. Aber besonders gefragt ist natürlich der Rat von Nobelpreisträgern. Joseph Stiglitz ist ein Nobelpreisträger. 2001 hat er den Nobelpreis für Wirtschaft bekommen und er hat sich immer wieder mit kritischen Worten gemeldet. Sein neuestes Buch heißt Der Preis der Ungleichheit und dieses Buch rechnet mit den Verhältnissen vor allen Dingen in den USA ab, aber auch Europa bekommt sehr viele kritische Worte. Wie also kann die Krise gelöst werden? Darüber spreche ich mit Professor Joseph Stiglitz. Professor Stiglitz, everybody seems to be worried about debt. Sovereign debt, debts of banks, debts in the whole system. You do not seem to be worried too much about that. Why is that?
Well, the most important problem right now is unemployment, the fact that our economy is not working up to potential. Key idea to understand is the deficit didn't cause the economic downturn. The economic downturn caused the deficit. If we can get Europe and America working again, put people back to work, the deficit will be greatly reduced.
All right, but there is a worry that if you have put out too much financial stimuli, in the end, that will increase and increase again. I mean, the Japanese example is a bad example in this respect.
It depends on how you spend the money. Right now, say for the United States, we can borrow at a negative real interest rate. And we have a wealth of projects with very high real returns, projects in infrastructure, technology, education. If we borrow that money at negative real interest rates, invested at 10, 20, 30% returns, our balance sheet will be stronger. And so, in fact, the way to make our debt-GDP ratio go down is now to stimulate the economy, even if it entails right now borrowing.
This is very much question whether the GDP ratio is really that high. But the question is that when the central banks have put down the interest rates, so are you saying that the central banks have done a good job in lowering interest rates, even that you have a negative interest now?
Well, the real problem is that as they've lowered those interest rates, the money hasn't flowed into the real sector. It hasn't. The small, medium-sized enterprises in the United States have still trouble getting access to credit. And part of the reason for this is the weak economy. And so we are in a vicious circle, a number of vicious circles. So the weak economy means that even those firms that are sitting on piles of cash don't want to invest. So unless we can get our economy jump-started, we're going to be mired in the situation of low GDP, low tax revenues, and a high deficit to the GDP ratio.
Would that recipe also apply to Europe? I mean, we have a different situation. We have even more debts, and we have some countries near to bankruptcy.
If Europe mutualized its debt, the overall debt-GDP ratio for Europe is actually better than that of the United States. It's because you fragmented your economies. So I think that if you could get together, you have some other problems like the banking system, and you need to create a common banking framework for all of Europe, which means not just common supervision, but common deposit insurance and common resolution. If you did that, then your economy would be just as strong, I believe, as the United States. You could borrow at a negative real interest rate like the United States, and that would mean that you would be able to take these investments that would strengthen your economy today, lower unemployment today, and provide the basis of stronger long-term economic growth.
The German government really advocates everybody is responsible for his own debt. Otherwise, there is no pressure to reduce debt. So the question is the German government, Mrs. Merkel, doing something wrong at the moment to solve the crisis?
Yes. The fact is that we've seen what's happened in austerity. Those packages of austerity, unaccompanied by a growth package, have resulted in depression. Depression in Greece, depression in Spain, recession in Europe as a whole, and continually the Troika leaders have said they're surprised. They're surprised at how weak the economy is, the magnitude of the downturn, the disappointed in the improvement in the fiscal balances. I'm surprised that they're surprised, because when you almost inevitably, when you engage in these austerity measures, they will weaken the economy.
Let's come back to the central banks. I mean, you have criticized frequently the Fed and you have criticized the ECB. Mr. Draghi has changed the rules of the game. So do you now support Draghi? Did he do the right thing?
Well, what he is doing is only a temporary palliative. He has said this, and Bernanke has said a similar thing in the United States. The problems in Europe are fundamental, but they aren't just fiscal consolidation, and that's where the ECB is wrong. The real problem is the structural arrangements in Europe. What is needed is mutualization of debt and a common banking framework. And unless they do that, and unless Europe realizes that that's what is needed, combined with a real growth package, these temporary palliatives simply won't work. They postpone the day of reckoning.
So you are very much worried about inequality, and obviously the crisis has increased inequality, even in Europe. Do you think we are at the brink of a new class warfare in Europe, for instance?
I think that clearly there is increasing inequality. It was going on before the crisis, but the crisis has made things much worse, inevitably so. Unemployment goes up, that puts downward pressure on wages, cutbacks, particularly as a result of austerity in the safety net and the protections that are so important for those at the middle and the bottom. So, yes, the problems have been getting worse and will continue to get worse unless the kinds of reforms that I described before are undertaken.
What would you say then to Mrs. Merkel if you could give her an advice? What action she has to take straight away?
I think I would say three things. Mutualization of debt in one form or another, a common banking framework, and a growth strategy that really works. And by that, I mean not just talking about growth, not just saying if they only had fiscal consolidation, growth would restore. That's not happened. It's not happened in the past. It's not likely to happen going forward.
What about financial markets? I mean, they have really caused this trouble to some extent, and now a lot of rules are on the way to put control on these financial markets. Is this the right measure? Should we go back to sort of village banking where the banks just give a bit of credit and get some interest and that's it?
Well, I do think that the core part of our banking system ought to go back to the functions which it's supposed to serve. That is to say, the way it serves society. And that is as a depository institution, as an institution lending to small and medium-sized enterprises and larger enterprises to create new jobs, expand enterprises, but not speculation. Now, there's a role for, you might say, speculation, but it should be a small role. And it should not be done in government-insured financial institutions and government-insured depository institutions. Those should be separated out. And it's not just because taxpayer money is at risk. It's because when you can make so much money by speculation, you turn your attention away from your core mission, which is lending. And as a result of that, you get a failure to perform the core functions to our society.
Many Germans are worried about inflation. Are they right, or is this just something which will come now in this environment which you described?
Inflation is not the problem today. In fact, if anything, it's deflation. When you have so much excess supply, such a shortage of demand, there is no inflationary pressure. Now, the worry that many people have is, given the liquidity that's been put into the banking system, if suddenly the economy started to recover, we could go from the current situation into an inflationary situation overnight. I wish, in some sense, the economy could recover that quickly, but that's never happened. And as the economy recovers, it's not going to happen overnight, there are ample tools available to the ECB and ample commitment that as they see the economy recover, they can start taking out liquidity, making sure that inflation does not happen.
A personal question, finally. Are you an investor? You are not a speculator, definitely. Are you at least an investor? You got a Nobel Prize, half of it goes to the taxman, but probably something is left over. You write a lot of books, so there is also some money coming in, and you have to do something with the money. What do you do with the money you're earning?
Oh, if you remember, my previous book was called Free Fall, and I gave a very pessimistic prescription of where the economy was going. And unfortunately, most of what I said back then in 2010 has turned out to be correct. I anticipated the economy would not recover. We're now into a half decade of recession. And even if the stock market goes up for a while, it's not a secure foundation. So the result of that is I've kept my money in liquid forms.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Das war also der Rat eines Nobelpreisträgers, meine Damen und Herren. Lassen Sie uns sehen, was sich denn in der Wirtschaft dann wirklich entwickelt. Ein Rat von vielen und wir werden wahrscheinlich weitermachen mit Versuch und Irrtum in der Hoffnung, dass wir nicht allzu viele Irrtümer begehen. Wie immer können Sie diese Sendung auch im Internet verfolgen unter drf.fm. Das war's. Herzlichen Dank fürs Zuschauen und auf Wiedersehen. Bis zum nächsten Mal.